So we now have an explanation for how evil became embedded in this world and how it became embedded in human hearts. God created a paradise, but it's now fallen because human beings chose to let evil into this place. They succumbed to that temptation, and it's from that moment that all the world's sufferings and trials and sorrows ultimately flow. But I guess the question now remains, now that this world is fallen, why does God let the whole show continue? I mean, why does God tolerate this fallen world now that it has things like disease, death, and natural disasters in it? Why didn't God just end things immediately when evil entered into it? Indeed, in our complaints about pain in this world, we seem to be saying something like that to God. We seem to be saying, God, this world is so filled with pain, why didn't you just annihilate it back there at the flood? Why did you save anyone at all? Why continue through Noah at all? Or when destroying Sodom and Gomorrah, why did you stop with just those two cities? Why not just obliterate the whole world completely? Can't you see just how awful our existence has been ever since on this earth? Why let us live in a world where bone cancer and natural disasters and suffering is even possible? But let's be honest with ourselves here. Aren't we glad that God didn't annihilate the world back there and that he did allow the whole thing to keep rolling on in spite of its fallenness? If he did obliterate his creation back in Genesis because it had fallen, and if the world had therefore ended thousands of years ago, you wouldn't be here today, and neither would I. We wouldn't have had our chance to live in this world. And aren't you glad that God didn't make that choice? I know I am, because for all we complain about the evil and suffering in this world, and admittedly there is some, I still somehow feel privileged to be alive in this world. And I suspect that unless you're in the depths of depression, you probably feel the same way too. In fact, I suspect also that the thought of having to die and leave this world behind may even bring us a tinge of sadness. Well then, if we're glad to be here, that means there is a significant portion of this life that we still really quite enjoy, which means that in spite of its flaws and struggles and evils and trials, there's still something quite good about this place that is worth persisting with. Indeed, if we're in any sense glad to be alive in this world, then we're already agreeing with God that he was right to spare it and that he was right to keep the whole thing rolling on in spite of its fallenness. And therefore, we can hardly complain about his choice to do so. After all, if we have concluded that life is still worthwhile in spite of everything, we can hardly shout and argue at God for reaching the exact same conclusion as us. And of course, there is much that remains good about this world. We know there is. Eden may be lost, but there are residual echoes of paradise all around us still. Aren't you glad that you've been alive and been given the chance to see a starry night sky, for example? Aren't you glad that you've lived to hear music, laughed until your sides hurt, seen a sunrise and a sunset, a rainbow, seen the colours of autumn, played a sport, felt the sun on your skin, smelled a flower, fallen in love, had a child, eaten fresh fruit, travelled, explored, discovered, read books, watched movies, heard stories, cried, danced, made friends, planted a garden, flown in a plane, eaten ice cream, seen the ocean, celebrated a holiday, seen a firework display, climbed a mountain, spent a day at the beach, experienced a hug, walked through a pine forest, petted a dog, eaten chocolate, had a snowball fight, started a business, sat in the outdoors by a fire, baked cookies, learned piano, painted a picture, loved and been loved, slept in a comfortable bed. Do you wish that none of those things had ever happened? Do you wish that you never been alive to have those experiences? In spite of all the pain that stalks us in this life, there is so much to savor here still. I am personally glad that God didn't end the whole thing with Noah and that he did let the whole show run on long enough for me to be born and to get my chance at all of this. Yes, even with the possibility of pain and sadness, disease and natural disasters, however long or short my life may be, and with all the struggles I've experienced along the way, to be honest, my first instinct isn't to raise my fist in fury at the God who made me because there's just too much pain and suffering here, like what Stephen Fry does. But rather, my first instinct is to be grateful that he let me have some time to be a part of all of this creation, even with its difficulties and trials. In that sense, I can't argue with God that letting the world continue corrupted was a good idea because I've already reached the exact same conclusion. And if you are in any sense happy to be alive right now, you have too. Indeed, there's something disingenuous and hypocritical about people who rage against God for how awful the world is, when in reality, they've been quite glad to be a part of the whole thing.